Good day and great health. My name is Dr. Jared Casarco of Ohio Specific Chiropractic. I'm a pediatric, family wellness, and upper cervical specific chiropractor. Today on this video, I'm going to answer the question, what causes a vertebral subluxation? You see, as upper cervical chiropractors, our main objective is to reduce and correct vertebral subluxations, so that will undoubtedly bring up the question, what causes a vertebral subluxation? Well, we can then boil down that answer to one simple but very complicated idea, and that is stress. You see, the stresses of life are what are going to cause a vertebral subluxation. Now, since stress is very complex and the variations or the examples of stress are very numerous, we can, though, subcategorize stress into three main groups. Those three main groups are physical stress, chemical stress, and emotional stress. Now, just a few examples of physical stress, and these are the stresses that we often understand a little bit easier. And those, some examples of physical stress is we can have, slips and trips and falls. So if you have a slip on the ice, a fall off of a ladder, a trip off the sidewalk, those are examples of physical stress. Other examples, you can have just different twistings or wrenchings of not only your spine, but any part of your body. And really the first exposure to stress that we have in our life occurs from our own birth. So especially if you have a traumatic birth. But not necessarily does the birth have to be a physical trauma. You can have physical, chemical, and emotional stresses to both the mother and the baby that can create stress and can result in a vertebral subluxation. Now, some chemical stress examples is, if we have different pesticides that are found on our food that we sort of ingest, we kind of take in those chemicals. If there's different smokes or smogs in the air that we breathe in those chemicals. Or if there's different chemically enriched products or synthetic ingredients found in our food or in our water that we also drink in or consume, and those chemicals are then taken into our body. But chemical stress doesn't necessarily have to be externally brought in. We can have different chemical stresses that are found internally as well. Now, emotional stress. These are the, I guess you could say the emotional stresses are often the elephant in the room. These are the things that we really don't think about that often, even though the emotional stresses or the emotions or our thoughts are really the most that is going to affect how our health, is going to affect our health outcomes the most. So some simple examples of emotional stress, if you have a tough or a rough day at work, those can be emotionally taxing or stressful. And then if you bring that stress home to work and you come home to your loved one and you maybe have some type of spat or fights with your spouse, those create emotional stresses. And then if there's also then some type of death or of your spouse or a loved one, these also create different emotional stresses or taxings onto the body. Now, if you sit and kind of try to list all these different stresses of the body, you might start to think that you are a sort of constant victim of the stresses of the world. But rest assured, our body is also designed to combat these stresses. Not only combat these stresses, but resist these stresses, and ultimately it can overcome these stresses of the world. And the main way our body overcomes these stresses is through our nerve system. You see, our nerve system is the master control system of our whole body. It does four main things. It controls all the movements we make. It senses everything we feel. It regulates all our body organs, and it relates us to the outside world. So now, how our body functions is through our nerve system. So if our body is going to be constantly be bombarded by these stresses on a day-to-day basis, one job of our nerve system is to adapt to these stresses to help keep the body in homeostatic balance. Now, there's two main avenues or routes that can occur when our body comes in contact with these stresses. It can either adapt to that stress ideally or at its optimal level, or if it can't adapt to the stress at its best, it's going to start to create compensations in the body. Now, if our nerve system adapts to that stress, but it can't adapt to that stress at 100%, is going to start to create compensations in its adaptation. When our body starts to create adaptations in the body, we get into a realm of what's called static homeostasis. This means our body is able to maintain a relative level of homeostasis, but some aspect of our homeostasis isn't able to adapt as best it can. It's not being at its functional optimal level. So what that means is our not only just our nervous system, but our body overall is in a state of functional dis-ease. Dis-ease is not disease, but dis-ease. It's without ease. That means our nerve system, or just our body overall, is in some type of interference or disruption. There's some type of roadblock that's preventing or impeding the full expression of our functionality. Now, how does this functional dis-ease or static homeostasis present itself? Well, when we take our nerve scans, what will happen is that we'll start to see, or it'll start to show a stuck state or a pattern in the neurological scans. So when we take our neurological scans, every time we take that scan, we'll start to see a similar pattern or a similar stuck state in the homeostatic balance of our nerve system. That means that there's some type of roadblock or impedance happening in the full expression of that nerve system. Now, it must also be known that, no matter the stress, if it's physical stress, chemical stress, or emotional stress, all these stresses, no matter what, will create some type of physical imprint on our body. One example, or one major imprint of that physical presentation, of that sort of compensation that occurs when our body can't completely adapt to that stress, is a vertebral subluxation. So a vertebral subluxation is a physical presentation of our body our body compensating to some type of stress. So when our body creates, or when our body finds itself in a vertebral subluxation, in that state of subluxation, that means our health potential has decreased. That means the flow of information from the brain going down into the body is being disrupted, and that occurs because in the upper cervical spine there is a disruption or an interference in the flow of information occurring from the brainstem, from the brain to the body. Now, again, the main objective of upper cervical chiropractic is to locate, adjust, reduce, and correct this vertebral subluxation. When we correct this vertebral subluxation, what happens is we start to increase our overall health potential. When there's no vertebral subluxation present, that means our brainstem, which is the connection between our brain above and our body below, can communicate that flow of information from our brain to the rest of our body. That's because our brainstem is really the neurological connecting point between the brain and the rest of our body. Again, not only our brain, but our brainstem are part of our nerve system, that master control system. So if our brainstem can't function, can't perform those 4 functions as best it can, that means our body overall can't function as best it can. So when we reduce and correct that vertebral subluxation, we can then reach a higher level of ideal adaptation in our nerve system. So when our body is in a greater ideal state of adaptation, that means we're now reaching a more ideal state of dynamic homeostasis. That means our body is optimally reaching its greatest level of homeostatic balance. When we are more in a state of dynamic homeostasis, that means our nerve system overall, especially our brainstem, is now at a state of functional ease. When we remove the disruptions, that means the communication between the brainstem and the brain above and the body below is at its greatest potential. Now, how does this present itself with our neurological scans? Is that when we take those scans, we're looking for change. We're looking for variance, really. So when we take that scan, that means that every time we take the scan, we'll see something slightly different each time. That means, again, our body is dynamically changing. Dynamic homeostasis is really one of the benchmarks or the hallmark of overall health and well-being. So again, our main objective as upper cervical chiropractors is to really ultimately improve or increase your just overall health potential. Now this is just to get a sort of a quick primer, or hopefully a simple way to try to break down sort of what causes a vertebral subluxation. But if you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can check me out on my website at ohiospecific.com. Thank you very much.